When an evil cop stopped a successful black millionaire on a routine drive, he thought he could intimidate her, humiliate her, and get away with it. But what he didn't know was that she was live streaming the entire encounter to hundreds of thousands of followers. As the truth spreads like wildfire, the tables turn in ways he never expected. You won't believe how justice is served. Subscribe now to see how it all unfolds. The soft hum of the engine filled the quiet night as Cynthia Johnson's sleek black Range Rover glided down the deserted suburban streets. The vehicle's glossy finish reflected the amber glow of streetlights, making it impossible to miss. Cynthia leaned back into the plush leather seat, her face radiant, still carrying the warmth of the evening's celebrations. It had been a beautiful occasion, a birthday party for her best friend's son, complete with cake smears, laughter, and heartfelt toasts. Her golden hoop earrings shimmered as she adjusted her phone on the dashboard holder. "Okay, everyone," she said, flashing a bright smile at her camera. With a practiced hand, she tapped her screen to start a live stream on her Instagram page, where 500,000 followers eagerly awaited her updates. Within seconds, comments and likes began pouring in. "Hey, Cynthia! Looking fab as always. Tell us about the party. Was it amazing? Queen of real estate in the building." Cynthia's manicured fingers swiped at the screen, scrolling through the comments. She let out a small laugh. All right, y'all calm down," she teased, her voice smooth and welcoming. "I'm just heading home after a wild little birthday party. You know how kids are, tons of energy, cake everywhere, but honestly, I wouldn't trade it for anything. Celebrating with my people is what life's all about." Her followers hung on to her every word as she transitioned seamlessly into talking about her life. "It's been a crazy ride, honestly. Y'all know I started with nothing. Like literally nothing. I was 19, hustling as a receptionist while taking real estate classes on the side." Her hands stayed steady on the wheel, but her voice carried a hint of pride. 10 years later, here we are. Multiple properties, a growing portfolio, and... She glanced around her luxurious SUV with a knowing smirk. "A little treat to myself for all the hard work." Cynthia's tone softened. "But let's be real for a second. It's not all glitz and glamour. Being a black woman in this business? Whew." She exhaled sharply, gripping the steering wheel tighter. "It's like people don't believe you can be smart, successful, and unapologetically you. They doubt you, they test you, and sometimes they straight up hate you for thriving. But you know what? I don't let it stop me." She looked directly into the camera for a moment before focusing back on the road ahead, her eyes sharp and determined. "If you're out there thinking you can't do it, whatever it is, you can. They'll doubt you, they'll try to knock you down, but you have to keep pushing. Always." The comments section erupted in applause emojis and messages of solidarity. Cynthia had a gift for turning everyday moments into inspiring speeches, and her audience adored her for it. About a block behind her, Officer Frank Delaney sat in his patrol car, parked on the side of the road. A hulking figure in his mid-40s, Frank exuded the kind of bitterness that seemed to get worse as he aged. His police uniform barely contained his bulky frame, and his sharp, icy blue eyes watched the Range Rover intently. At first he thought the vehicle was just another flashy car passing by, but when he caught sight of the driver, a young black woman laughing and talking animatedly, his blood boiled. "Of course," he muttered under his breath, sneering. "Another one of them, flashing their money around like they own the damn world." Frank's hatred wasn't just casual racism, it was personal. He had spent years watching the world change around him, and he loathed what he saw as minorities taking over. Black professionals, entrepreneurs, and even millionaires like Cynthia represented everything he thought was wrong with the system. He had convinced himself that people like her were stealing opportunities that rightfully belonged to people like him. He gripped the car's steering wheel tightly, his knuckles turning white. The SUV wasn't just a car to him, it was a challenge. Who did she think she was, driving around his town like she owned it, laughing like she didn't have a care in the world? He slowly started his car and started to trail her vehicle, his stomach burning with a sick combination of envy and rage. He could tell that she was saying something, probably singing or on a call, but it only made him angrier. He couldn't hear her words, but he could feel her confidence and audacity, and it was enough to push him over the edge. "Oh, I'll put a stop to this," he growled. His hand hovered over the radio for a moment before deciding against it. This was personal. He didn't want backup for this one. Up ahead, Cynthia's voice continued to fill the SUV as she navigated the quiet streets. "All right, y'all. I'm almost home," she said, glancing briefly at the phone. "But before I go, quick update. I've got a new project dropping soon. Stay tuned because—" Red and blue lights exploded in her rearview mirror. The flashing lights caught Cynthia off guard, and her heart jumped as she instinctively slowed down. "Oh, hold up," she said, glancing behind her. "Looks like I'm getting pulled over." The comments section went wild. "What? Why are they pulling you over?" "Girl, stay calm." Cynthia kept the live stream running as she signaled and pulled over to the side of the road. She took a deep breath, trying to calm the nerves that always flared up during interactions with the police. Her followers continued pouring in advice and support. "All right, y'all. Stay with me," she said, forcing a smile to mask her anxiety. "We'll see what this is about." Behind her, Frank adjusted his hat and stepped out of his car, his heavy boots thudding against the asphalt. He approached the driver's side window slowly, relishing the tension he knew he was creating. "Let's do this," he muttered under his breath, already planning his next move. Meanwhile, Cynthia placed both hands on the steering wheel, her jaw tightening as she steadied her breath. The comments on her live stream scrolled faster than she could keep up with. "Stay calm, girl. He probably has no reason to stop you. We got your back, Cynthia." Cynthia adjusted her phone slightly to ensure the camera angle captured everything. "Okay, y'all, looks like it's just a traffic stop," she said with forced calmness. "I'm not sure what it's about, but I'll keep the live stream running. Just in case." The sound of heavy boots crunching against the asphalt made her glance at the side mirror. Officer Frank Delaney approached the car with the deliberate, slow gait of someone who enjoyed wielding authority. His face was hard, his lips pressed into a thin, cruel line as he adjusted his belt and leaned into the window. "License and registration," he barked, without so much as a greeting. His eyes darted around the car as he hoped to find anything slightly suspicious. "Good evening, officer," Cynthia said politely, her voice calm but firm. "May I ask why I'm being pulled over?" Frank let out a low, derisive chuckle, ignoring her question. "License and registration, now." Cynthia nodded, keeping her movements slow and deliberate. She opened her glove compartment and retrieved her registration, then reached into her purse for her license. She placed both documents on the edge of the window, her hands returning to the wheel immediately after. "Thank you," she said. "Again, officer, may I ask what I did wrong?" Frank stared at her for a moment, his gaze lingering on her designer bag, the glinting jewelry on her wrists, and the flawless interior of the SUV. His jaw tightened. "You were speeding," he said flatly. Cynthia frowned. "Speeding? With all due respect, officer, I wasn't. I've had cruise control on since I left the party." Her followers caught that exchange immediately. "Speeding? He's lying. Cynthia literally said she's on cruise control 5 minutes ago." Frank's lips curled into a smirk. "Oh, so you're a lawyer now? Don't argue with me. You were speeding." His tone dripped with condescension. Cynthia's heart raced, but she forced herself to remain calm. "I'm not arguing, sir. I'm simply stating that my speed hasn't changed." Frank leaned closer to the window, his voice dropping an octave. "Look, I don't need a lecture from you, lady. You think just because you're sitting in this fancy car, you can talk to me however you want?" The hostility in his tone was unmistakable, and Cynthia's followers picked up on it immediately. "He's already got it out for her. Keep calm, Cynthia. Don't let him provoke you." Cynthia's hands tightened on the steering wheel, but her voice stayed even. "Officer, I'm not trying to be disrespectful. I just want to understand what's happening." Frank let out a sharp exhale, clearly annoyed by her composure. "Step out of the vehicle," he ordered abruptly. Cynthia's heart sank. "Why do I need to step out, officer? Am I under arrest?" "Step out of the vehicle," Frank repeated, his voice louder now. He tapped the glass with his flashlight for emphasis. The comments exploded in a frenzy. "Why is he asking her to get out? This isn't normal." "Do not get out, Cynthia." "He's trying to bait her." Frank's face darkened as he glanced at the phone positioned in front of the dashboard. He leaned closer to the dashboard, his eyes narrowing at the camera. "Is that damn thing on?" he snapped. Cynthia shook her head calmly. "No. I was just talking to my friends earlier, officer." She lied. Frank straightened up, his fists clenching. "Chatting and driving. Is that not a recipe for disaster?" he muttered under his breath. The hostility was unmistakable now, and Cynthia's followers immediately understood that she didn't want him to know that the whole thing was live and recorded. They immediately began to share the live stream at an alarming rate. Influencers, activists, and even a few journalists began jumping into the stream, watching the tense encounter unfold in real time. Meanwhile, Frank walked back to his cruiser, his mind racing. He couldn't believe her nerve, questioning him, acting like she was untouchable. His grip tightened on his flashlight. "Not on my watch," he thought bitterly. Back in the SUV, Cynthia glanced at her phone. The viewer count had skyrocketed to over 50,000, and messages of support flooded in. "All right, y'all. I don't know what's going on, but I'm staying calm," she said, her voice steady. "I'm documenting everything. Keep sharing this." From her side mirror, she could see Frank returning, his flashlight bouncing off the Range Rover's glossy exterior. The knot in her stomach tightened, but she kept her face neutral as he approached again. "You're coming out of the car one way or another," Frank said, his tone ominous. "Either you step out yourself, or I'll pull you out." The comment section exploded. WTF is wrong with him? This is harassment. Straight up harassment. "Cynthia, don't let him intimidate you. Stay calm." Cynthia took a deep breath. "Officer, I'm not resisting. I'm just asking you to explain why Before she could finish, Frank reached in, yanking at the door handle. Cynthia's seatbelt locked in place as she tried to move, and her phone jostled slightly in its mount, giving viewers a shaky but clear view of the escalating situation. "I told you to get out," Frank growled, grabbing her arm and tugging roughly. The live stream audience erupted in fury. "He can't do that! This is assault! Somebody call 911 on him now!" Cynthia kept her voice calm despite the sharp tug that nearly pulled her out of the seat. "Officer, my seatbelt is stuck. Let me—" "Shut up," Frank barked, his face inches from hers. Thousands of viewers watched in horror as he continued to pull on her arm, ignoring her protests. Little did Frank know, his actions were being broadcasted to thousands of people. The live stream's viewer count ticked up past 75,000. People were recording, sharing, and tagging local news stations. Cynthia's soft squeals as he dragged her arm sparked a tidal wave of outrage, and it was only just beginning. "Get out of the car!" Frank yelled. The tension in the air was palpable, his face a mask of barely contained rage. Cynthia's seatbelt had locked in place, and no amount of maneuvering would release it quickly. Her hands trembled slightly as she squealed and tried to get the seatbelt off. "Enough!" Frank bellowed, his patience snapping. Without waiting, he reached back again, gripping her arm tightly this time. The force of his pull caused her to jerk awkwardly against the restraint, her head lightly hitting the seat's headrest. The live stream captured everything. The camera's angle was shaky, but the viewers could see Frank's fingers digging into Cynthia's arm and hear her pained gasp. Comments came pouring in faster than ever. "He's assaulting her! This is out of control! Tag every journalist you know! This maniac is done!" Cynthia's voice was firm, but tinged with frustration. "Officer, I'm not resisting. My seatbelt is stuck." Frank ignored her completely, yanking harder until the seatbelt gave way with a sharp snap. Cynthia stumbled out of the SUV, her designer heels scraping against the asphalt as she tried to steady herself. Frank's grip on her arm didn't loosen, and he shoved her back against the side of the car. "You think you're some hotshot, huh?" Frank snarled, gesturing toward her car. "Well, you can't deceive me with all this." Cynthia's followers erupted in outrage. "OMG, this is so illegal. Someone call the police on this cop. This is insane. We need a lawyer on this ASAP." Cynthia's chest heaved as she took a deep breath, staring Frank directly in the eyes. "Officer, this is unnecessary and excessive. I've complied with everything you've asked." Frank's lips curled into a sneer. "You think you're untouchable, don't you? Driving around like you own the damn world." He released her arm, only to pull out a flashlight and shine it into the back seat. "Stay right here," he barked, moving toward the passenger side of the car. Cynthia raised her voice slightly so that her viewers would be able to hear her. "I have done absolutely nothing wrong, officer. I haven't done anything wrong. And now you're searching my car without my consent." Cynthia knew that he wouldn't be able to tell the phone was on live unless he looked directly at it. The way she had positioned the phone, in addition with her privacy screen, it would be difficult for anyone to actually see what was happening on the phone's screen. Frank was completely oblivious to the audience he was performing for. As he stood on the other side of the SUV, he opened the glove compartment with practiced ease. He pulled out a small plastic bag filled with white powder and held it up triumphantly, turning back towards Cynthia with a mocking smile. "Well, well, well. What do we have here?" he said, loud enough for the live stream to pick up. Cynthia's eyes widened in disbelief. "That's not mine," she said firmly, her voice rising. "You just pulled that out of your pocket. Everyone who knows me knows that I've never touched drugs in my life." Frank's smirk faltered for a brief moment before he recovered. "Save it," he sneered. "I've seen your type before. Fancy car, fancy clothes. It's all a front. You're just another dealer, aren't you?" The comment section exploded. Did he just plant drugs in her car? "Someone stop this man. He's going too far. This live stream is evidence. Keep it rolling, Cynthia." Cynthia's voice remained calm but defiant. "Officer, you're lying, and you know it. You know that I had no drugs on me. You can't possibly do this to me." Frank hesitated, taking a look around to make sure he had no witnesses, the weight of her words finally beginning to sink in. But his pride wouldn't let him back down. "We'll see what the court has to say about that," he growled, pulling out his radio. While Frank radioed for backup, Cynthia's assistant, Paige, sat in her apartment, her phone vibrating incessantly. Paige had tuned into the live stream early, like she always did when Cynthia went live, but she never expected to witness something like this. "Oh my God," Paige muttered, her fingers flying across her phone as she texted Cynthia's lawyer, Ava Sinclair. "Paige, 8:13 p.m. Ava, you need to get on Instagram right now. Cynthia's being harassed by a cop. He planted drugs in her car." Ava, a popular and formidable civil rights attorney, didn't waste a second. She clicked the link Paige sent her, her blood boiling as she watched the live stream. "Unbelievable," Ava muttered, already dialing the number for a local activist group. Within minutes, screenshots of Frank's actions and Cynthia's calm yet firm responses flooded social media platforms. Twitter hashtags like #JusticeForCynthia and Frank Delaney Exposed began trending. Journalists started tuning in too. One reporter from a major outlet tweeted, "This live stream is one of the most disturbing things I've ever seen. A corrupt officer planting evidence in real time. Unacceptable. I'm reaching out to @City Police Department for comment." Back at the scene, Frank's radio crackled as he called for backup. What he didn't know was that his colleagues, and even his superior, Captain Angela Reyes, were already watching the live stream. Meanwhile, Cynthia's followers continued to share and tag prominent figures. Celebrities and influencers began joining the live stream, flooding the comments with messages of solidarity. "This is beyond outrageous. Someone get this woman the justice she deserves. The National Association for the Advancement of Colored People, are you seeing this? Step in now. City Police Department, your officer is out of control. Do better." Cynthia couldn't take a glance at her phone without arousing attention, but she knew her live audience must have tripled. She felt a surge of hope despite the fear coursing through her veins. "You're not getting away with this, officer," she said firmly, her voice carrying an unshakable resolve. "Not this time." Frank turned to face her, his expression unreadable. For the first time, he seemed to realize that this wasn't going to go the way he planned. At the City Police Department headquarters, the night shift was usually quiet, filled with paperwork and the occasional radio call. That peace was shattered when Captain Angela Reyes burst into the operations room, her phone gripped tightly in her hand. "Can someone explain what the hell is going on?" she barked, her voice sharp and cutting through the low hum of the room. The officers on duty turned to look at her, confused. Reyes's eyes darted to a young officer in the corner who looked particularly nervous. "Daniels, I know you've seen this," she said, holding up her phone, where Cynthia's live stream was still playing. Why is one of my officers trending on social media for all the wrong reasons? Daniel swallowed hard. Captain, it's Officer Delaney. He's out on a traffic stop, he stammered. Reyes's teenage son had texted her minutes earlier, his message short but alarming. Mom, your department is going viral for all the wrong reasons. Check this out now. The moment she opened the link, her blood boiled. The video showed Delaney dragging a woman out of her SUV, manhandling her with unnecessary force. Then she watched in disbelief as he planted a bag of cocaine in her glove compartment. Reyes slammed her phone on the desk. Get me his location, now! As officers scrambled to pull up Delaney's location, the situation outside HQ was spiraling. Calls flooded the department's main line. Emails poured in from journalists requesting statements, and their social media accounts were overwhelmed with demands for justice. The department's official Twitter handle had already been tagged over 50,000 times in the past hour. Tweets ranged from outrage to demands for action. City Police Department, is this what your officers are trained to do? We're watching. Fire Frank Delaney now. This is why we don't trust law enforcement. Do something. In a conference room down the hall, another officer leaned back in his chair, muttering as he scrolled through the comments. This isn't just bad. This is nuclear. Captain Reyes grabbed her keys, her jaw set in grim determination. I'll deal with this myself. Notify dispatch that I'm heading to the scene. She didn't wait for a response, storming out the door and climbing into her unmarked police car. The drive to the scene was tense, her hands gripping the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles turned white. As she glanced at her phone mounted on the dashboard, the live stream continued to play, and every moment of Delaney's behavior made her angrier. Her son's voice echoed in her head. Mom, people are saying you're covering for him. You've got to act fast. Reyes didn't just want to act fast. She wanted to act decisively. Meanwhile, outside Cynthia's SUV, the situation was spiraling. The live stream had now hit over 300,000 viewers, with people from all over the country tuning in. Journalists were setting up live streams of their own, amplifying Cynthia's story across multiple platforms. Activists from a local justice coalition had already begun arriving at the scene, alerted by calls and messages from viewers. They carried signs hastily scrawled with phrases like, "Stop police abuse," and "Justice for Cynthia." The crowd was small at first, just a handful of people standing on the sidewalk recording videos and shouting for accountability. But with every passing minute, more cars pulled up, and more people joined the growing crowd. Cynthia couldn't understand how a day that has started so well was about to end on a terrible note. She had just been driving carefully home after a good day. She couldn't tell how everything had taken a turn. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she knew she would have the last laugh. Unaware of the chaos brewing around him, Frank Delaney leaned against Cynthia's SUV, his arms crossed and his expression smug. He was oblivious to the live stream's popularity or the crowd forming just a block away. To him, this was still a simple situation. A black woman who needed to be put in her place. You think acting all high and mighty is going to save you? Frank sneered, leaning close to Cynthia. Let me tell you how this is going to go. You're going to jail tonight, and nobody's going to do anything to stop it. Cynthia met his gaze, her face calm but defiant. Officer, I think you're being really scary right now, she said, her voice shaky. Frank chuckled darkly. Yeah? That's exactly how I like to see people like you. Scared and obedient. People like me? Cynthia asked. Yes! He yelled, taking up all the important positions left for strong white people. He turned away as he spoke, and that's when his eyes caught the crowd forming. He gestured to the crowd that was now visible in the distance. What? You think these people scare me? They can scream all they want. I'm the law here. The comments on the live stream exploded in response. This man is so out of touch. He has no idea what's coming. Captain Reyes, where you at? Get this guy off the streets. Just then, the sound of tires screeching pierced the air. Frank turned, his smug expression faltering slightly as an unmarked police car pulled up beside him. Captain Angela Reyes stepped out, her face a storm of fury. Delaney, she called, her voice sharp and commanding. Frank's posture stiffened as he turned to face her. Captain, Reyes cut him off, holding up a hand. "Save it," she snapped. "You've got a lot of explaining to do." Behind her, the crowd erupted into cheers as they recognized her. Cameras turned toward her, recording every moment of her arrival. Cynthia's followers were glued to their screens, sensing the tide was finally about to turn. Reyes turned to Cynthia, her tone softening slightly. "Ma'am, are you okay?" Cynthia nodded. "I'm fine, Captain, but you need to see this." She gestured to her phone where the live stream was still running. Frank's eyes widened in disbelief as he understood what was happening. He had taken a quick glance at the propped phone, but it didn't appear to be recording. "She lied to me," he muttered to himself. As Reyes watched the footage, her face darkened further. She turned back to Frank, her expression unreadable. "Officer Delaney, you're done," she said quietly. The tension was suffocating as Captain Angela Reyes stood before Frank Delaney, her sharp eyes taking in every detail. Cynthia's calm but resolute demeanor, Frank's defensive posture, and the growing crowd of protesters in the background. Though only 10 minutes had passed since the ordeal began, it already felt like a case spiraling wildly out of control. "Officer Delaney," Reyes began, her voice cold and clipped, "you'd better have a damn good explanation for what I just watched on that live stream." Frank stiffened, his face a mix of confusion and indignation. "Captain, I don't know what you think you saw, but I was doing my job. This woman was speeding and acting suspiciously." Reyes raised a hand, cutting him off. "Speeding?" Her tone was skeptical. "I saw no mention of speeding until you started escalating this situation." She pointed at Cynthia. "And what's your excuse for dragging her out of her vehicle and planting narcotics in her glove compartment?" Frank's face flushed red. "That's not true. She's lying. She's just another entitled—" "Enough!" Reyes barked. Her voice echoed in the night air, drawing the attention of the crowd, which had now grown to twice the number. Phones were raised, recording every word. Reyes turned to Cynthia, her expression softening. "Ma'am, I'm so sorry for what you've experienced tonight. Can you show me the footage?" Cynthia nodded, taking her phone off its mount with steady hands. She pulled up the live stream replay, her fingers moving with practiced ease despite the weight of the moment. "Everything is here, Captain. From the moment he pulled me over to when he planted the drugs." Reyes leaned in, watching intently. The footage was damning. It showed Frank's aggression, the planting of the cocaine, and his hostile demeanor throughout. The captain's jaw tightened with every second of video she watched. The nearby backup officers who had just arrived exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear they had been expecting something entirely different, a routine traffic stop gone slightly awry. Instead, they were witnessing an unambiguous abuse of power. Reyes handed the phone back to Cynthia, her voice low but firm. "Thank you, Ms. Johnson. Please keep this live stream going. We're going to need this evidence." Cynthia nodded, her followers still glued to the screen. The viewer count had soared to nearly 500,000, with comments flooding in at a breakneck pace. "This captain is not playing around. Justice incoming. Let's go." "Frank's career is done." Reyes turned back to Frank, her face a mask of fury. "Officer Delaney, you've disgraced this badge tonight. Planting evidence using excessive force and racial profiling, all while being recorded live? What the hell were you thinking?" Frank's eyes darted nervously to the backup officers standing nearby. He could see the uncertainty in their faces, the way their hands hovered near their radios as though waiting for instructions. "Captain, I don't know what you're talking about," Frank stammered. "This is a misunderstanding. She's manipulating the footage." "Manipulating?" Reyes shot back, her voice rising. "You think hundreds of thousands of people watching this live are all being manipulated? You think I'm being manipulated?" She stepped closer, her eyes boring into his. "You planted drugs in her car. I watched it happen." Frank's bravado began to crumble. His mouth opened and closed as if searching for a response, but no words came out. One of the backup officers, a young patrolman named Martinez, finally spoke up. "Captain, we've had complaints about Delaney before. Maybe we should take a closer look at his history?" Frank whipped around, glaring at Martinez. "You watch your mouth, rookie," he snarled. "You don't know what you're talking about." Reyes raised her hand to silence them both. "Enough," she said, her tone sharp and final. She turned to the other officers. "Detain Officer Delaney. Now." "What?" Frank's voice cracked as two of his colleagues stepped forward hesitantly, pulling out handcuffs. "You heard me," Reyes said. "You're being arrested for misconduct, evidence tampering, and assault. This is not up for debate." Frank's panic spilled over into anger. "This is insane! I've been on the force for 20 years. You're going to take her word over mine?" He pointed at Cynthia, who stood silently, her phone still recording. "I'm not taking her word," Reyes snapped. "I'm taking the evidence." She gestured toward the phone and the growing crowd of witnesses. "The world saw what you did, Frank. There's no talking your way out of this." The backup officers exchanged a glance before stepping forward. Frank resisted at first, but they managed to secure the cuffs around his wrists. The crowd erupted into cheers and applause as they watched him being led away, his face red with humiliation. The livestream comments came in a tidal wave. "Finally, justice in real time. Shout out to Captain Reyes for stepping up. Frank Delaney, hope you enjoy prison." As the officers escorted Frank to the squad car, Reyes turned back to Cynthia. "Ms. Johnson, I can't undo what happened tonight, but I promise you this. We will hold him accountable, and I'll make sure this department learns from this." Cynthia nodded, her voice steady but filled with emotion. "Thank you, Captain. I appreciate you stepping in." Reyes glanced at the crowd, now filled with activists, reporters, and community members. The situation was far from over, but one thing was clear. Tonight, the system had been forced to listen. Captain Angela Reyes stood her ground as Frank Delaney's ranting echoed through the night air. His erratic behavior and hostility were a stark contrast to Cynthia Johnson's calm resilience, and the evidence Reyes had just seen left no room for doubt. "Officer Delaney," Reyes repeated, her voice sharp, "you're under arrest for assault, evidence tampering, and gross misconduct. Hand over your badge and gun, now." Frank's face contorted with disbelief. "What?" The officers standing nearby exchanged uneasy glances but didn't move. Reyes turned to them, her tone firm. "You heard me. Detain him." Two younger officers, Martinez and Carter, stepped forward hesitantly. "Officer Delaney," Martinez said carefully, "please turn around." "Are you kidding me?" Frank barked, backing up a step. His face was red, and beads of sweat dotted his forehead. "This is a joke. I didn't do anything wrong. She's lying. She's manipulating all of you. That's what people like her are known for." Reyes crossed her arms, her expression unmoving. "Officer Delaney, every second of your actions tonight was broadcast live. We all saw what you did. Stop embarrassing yourself further." Frank's eyes darted to the growing crowd, the flashing cameras and phones pointed at him like weapons. His panic turned to rage. "This is a damn witch hunt," he shouted. "You're gonna throw me under the bus for some loudmouth wannabe who thinks her money makes her special?" He turned towards Cynthia, his voice dripping with venom. "You think you're untouchable, don't you?" he sneered. "Driving around in your fancy car, live streaming like you're some kind of star. You're just another fraud, flashing cash you probably didn't even earn." Cynthia didn't flinch. She kept her phone steady, letting the live stream capture every vile word. Her followers were in a frenzy. "He's completely losing it. This is unreal." "Every word he says just proves he's guilty." "Stay calm, Cynthia. You've already won." Reyes had heard enough. "Martinez, Carter, get him in cuffs. Now." Frank threw up his hands in defiance. "Don't touch me! I've been on this force for 20 years. I've done more for this city than any of you." Martinez and Carter exchanged another look, but this time there was no hesitation. They moved in swiftly, grabbing Frank's arms and twisting them behind his back. "Get off me!" Frank bellowed, struggling as the handcuffs clicked into place. "You're all making a mistake! She's the criminal here!" Reyes stepped closer, her voice low and menacing. "No, Delaney. The mistake was thinking you could get away with this, and now you're going to pay for it." As the officers escorted Frank toward a waiting squad car, the crowd erupted in cheers. Activists chanted, "Justice for Cynthia," while the livestream audience flooded the comment section with applause and gratitude. Finally, this is what accountability looks like. Shout out to Captain Reyes for doing the right thing. Cynthia, you're an inspiration. Cynthia lowered her phone slightly, turning to address her viewers. Y'all, this is proof of the power we have when we stick together, she said, her voice steady but emotional. Thank you for sharing, for supporting, and for making sure the truth came out. This isn't just about me, it's about all of us. Let's keep pushing for change. The comments were filled with hearts, clapping emojis, and messages of support. The viewer count had climbed to over 700,000, and major news outlets were already covering the story. As Frank was placed in the back of the squad car, he shouted one last, desperate plea. You'll regret this, Reyes. You're ruining your career for her. Reyes didn't respond. She turned to Cynthia, her face softening. Ms. Johnson, are you all right? Cynthia nodded, taking a deep breath. I'll be okay. Thank you for stepping in when you did. Reyes offered a tight smile. I'm sorry for what happened tonight, but I promise you Delaney won't get away with this. Not on my watch. The squad car pulled away, taking Frank with it. The crowd roared in approval as his figure disappeared down the street. Cynthia turned her camera one last time to capture the scene. The cheering crowd, the determined captain, and the activists holding signs of support. She ended the live stream with a final message. This isn't the end, it's just the beginning. Let's keep fighting for justice, together. The next morning, the world had changed for Cynthia Johnson, and for Officer Frank Delaney. What had begun as a routine traffic stop had spiraled into a viral storm, one that couldn't be ignored. The video of Frank's misconduct, captured in stark detail on Cynthia's live stream, dominated every corner of the internet. Major platforms like Instagram, TikTok, and Twitter were flooded with clips from the live stream. Within hours, hashtags like #JusticeForCynthia, #FrankDelaneyExposed, and #AccountabilityNow were trending worldwide. Prominent activists, celebrities, and influencers shared the footage, amplifying its reach to millions. Cynthia woke to an avalanche of notifications. Her assistant, Paige, sat beside her at the dining table, phone in hand, rattling off updates. CNN just called, Paige said, scrolling rapidly through her email. They want an exclusive interview. So does NBC. Oh, and the New York Times just posted an op-ed about systemic racism in policing, and they mentioned you by name. Cynthia stared at her coffee cup, the events of the night before still weighing heavily on her. It's surreal, she said softly. One moment, I'm driving home, and the next, the whole world is watching. Paige placed a hand on her shoulder. The whole world is watching because of you. You stood your ground, Cynthia, and now people are finally listening. Across social media, the video had been viewed over 20 million times within 24 hours. Major news outlets replayed the footage in their segments, with anchors expressing shock and outrage at Frank's blatant misconduct. This is one of the most egregious abuses of power I've ever seen, said a commentator on MSNBC. The fact that this happened in full view of the public only underscores how rampant these issues are. Protests erupted across the city and beyond, with thousands marching under banners that read, Justice for Cynthia and End Police Corruption. At City Hall, activists gathered to demand immediate reforms, and petitions calling for Frank Delaney's prosecution had already garnered hundreds of thousands of signatures. As the media frenzy grew, journalists began digging into Frank Delaney's history, and what they uncovered only fueled the public's outrage. On the evening news, a local investigative reporter summarized her findings. Officer Frank Delaney has been the subject of at least a dozen formal complaints during his 20-year career. These include allegations of excessive force, racial profiling, and falsifying reports. Despite this, he remained on the force without facing any significant consequences. Until now. The details were damning. One complaint from a black teenager described how Frank had arrested him on fabricated charges after a minor traffic stop. Another involved a Latina mother who claimed Frank had used unnecessary force during a welfare check. This is a pattern, said civil rights attorney Ava Sinclair during an appearance on a national news program. Frank Delaney isn't just a bad apple, he's a symptom of a broken system that shields officers like him from accountability. The revelations sparked a deeper investigation into the police department. Captain Angela Reyes, now under intense scrutiny herself, held a press conference to address the mounting concerns. "I want to be clear," Reyes said, her expression somber. "The actions of Officer Delaney do not represent the values of this department. We are cooperating fully with an independent investigation, and I am committed to making the necessary changes to ensure this never happens again." Her words were met with mixed reactions. Some praised her for taking swift action against Frank, while others criticized the department for allowing his behavior to go unchecked for so long. Meanwhile, Cynthia found herself thrust into the national spotlight. Requests for interviews poured in, and her social media following exploded. What had once been a platform for discussing real estate and lifestyle tips was now a hub for activism and advocacy. "Good morning, everyone," Cynthia began in a video posted to her Instagram story. Her tone was calm but resolute. "First, I want to thank you all for the overwhelming support I've received. It means the world to me. But this isn't just about me. What happened last night is something that happens to people of color every single day, just without the cameras there to capture it." The comments flooded in with messages of solidarity. "You're so brave, Cynthia. Thank you for speaking out. This is what a real leader looks like. We're with you all the way." Later that day, Cynthia appeared on Good Morning America for her first national interview. Sitting across from the host, she spoke candidly about her experience. "I didn't go live that night expecting any of this to happen," she said. "But when I realized how dangerous the situation was, I knew I had to document it, not just for my own safety, but for anyone else who might find themselves in my position. I'm grateful for the support, but there's so much more work to be done." The host nodded. "You've become a symbol of strength and resilience in the fight for justice. What's next for you?" Cynthia smiled faintly. "I'm not stopping here. I've already started working with local organizations to push for police reform, and I'm dedicating resources from my business to fund legal aid for victims of police misconduct. This isn't just about holding one man accountable. It's about changing the system." Her words resonated deeply, and the video of her interview quickly went viral. Cynthia's story inspired a wave of action across the country. Cities began revisiting complaints against officers with histories of misconduct, and lawmakers proposed new legislation to increase transparency and accountability in policing. For Cynthia, the journey was far from over. The trauma of that night lingered, but so did the determination to turn her pain into purpose. In an Instagram post a week later, she stood in front of a community center she had helped fund, holding a sign that read, "Justice for All." Her caption read, "Last week I was targeted for who I am, but today we're building something stronger, together. This is just the beginning." The courtroom was silent as the judge delivered the verdict. Frank Delaney sat hunched at the defendant's table, his face a pale shadow of the arrogant officer who had once terrorized Cynthia Johnson. For the charges of evidence tampering, assault, and gross misconduct in public office, the judge said, pausing to let the words sink in, "You are hereby sentenced to 5 years in state prison and are permanently barred from serving in any capacity in law enforcement." Gasps rippled through the courtroom, followed by murmurs of approval from activists and community members who had supported Cynthia throughout her journey. Frank's lawyer leaned in, whispering something urgent, but Frank barely reacted. The weight of his actions, and the consequences, had finally come crashing down. Outside the courthouse, Captain Angela Reyes stood at a podium flanked by reporters and cameras. Her usual composed demeanor carried a hint of weariness, but her voice was steady. "Today's verdict represents a step toward accountability," she said. "Officer Delaney's actions were reprehensible, and his removal from the force sends a clear message. Corruption and abuse of power will not be tolerated. But let me be clear, this is not the end. It is our responsibility to rebuild trust with the communities we serve, and that work begins now." Across town, Cynthia was seated in her office, preparing to go live once more. This time, her backdrop wasn't the interior of her luxury SUV, but a banner emblazoned with the words, "Justice for All, a new future for law enforcement accountability." She adjusted her camera and smiled softly as the live stream began, instantly drawing tens of thousands of viewers. "Hey everyone," she began. "It's been a whirlwind of a few weeks, but I wanted to take a moment to thank you all. Your support, your voices, and your actions have been the reason we've seen justice in this case, but I don't want this to stop here." She paused, her expression turning serious. "What happened to me is just one story out of countless others that don't get the same attention. That's why today, I'm launching the Justice for All initiative. This campaign will provide legal aid to victims of police misconduct, fund body cameras for underfunded departments, and support education programs to root out systemic racism in law enforcement. And," Cynthia continued, her voice softening, "I'm putting my money where my mouth is. I'm pledging $5 million from my business to get this started, and I'll be partnering with organizations across the country to make sure this money goes where it's needed most." The applause was deafening, and Cynthia felt a swell of pride. What had started as a traumatic event was now a movement that would impact lives far beyond her own. A month later, Cynthia stood on the steps of City Hall, addressing a crowd of activists, supporters, and community leaders. The air was charged with energy, a mix of determination and hope. "When that officer pulled me over, he thought he could take everything from me," Cynthia said, her voice carrying across the crowd. "He thought he could silence me, humiliate me, and make me feel powerless. But he underestimated one thing: the power of community." Cheers erupted, and Cynthia smiled, taking a moment to soak it in. "This isn't just about me. It's about all of us. Every person who's been stopped, questioned, or hurt because of the color of their skin. Every person who's felt invisible or unheard. Together, we turned an act of hate into a moment of justice. And together, we'll keep fighting for a future where no one has to go through what I did." She looked out over the crowd, her gaze steady and full of resolve. "This isn't the end. It's just the beginning." As the crowd cheered louder, Cynthia stepped back, feeling a profound sense of fulfillment. Her story had become a catalyst for change, and she was ready to keep leading the charge. That evening, as she sat in her home, scrolling through messages of support and updates from her campaign, Cynthia reflected on the journey. She thought about the fear she'd felt in that moment, the powerlessness when Frank had dragged her from her car. But she also thought about the strength she'd discovered, strength she hadn't even known she had. Her phone buzzed with a notification. Another news outlet had picked up her campaign story. Smiling, Cynthia put the phone down and looked out the window at the city skyline. "One step at a time," she whispered to herself. It wasn't just her fight anymore. It was a fight for everyone who deserved justice. And she was ready to keep going. Justice prevails when we stand together, and I'm so grateful you've been part of this journey. For another story that inspires change and resilience, click the video to the left. And if you believe in the power of accountability and community, subscribe to join me in shining a light on stories that matter. See you next time.